For ships, that's all it takes to change the economics of a war being fought thousands of miles away. For vessels sitting quietly in a British port right now, crewed by Ukrainians, trained by NATO, and aimed at a 34-kilometer stretch of water that controls a fifth of the world's oil supply. And when those ships move, Vladimir Putin is going to feel it directly in his treasury. This is the story most people aren't connecting, because on the surface it looks like a mine-clearing operation in the Persian Gulf, a technical naval mission, a logistical footnote to a bigger conflict. But beneath the headlines, what the United Kingdom and Ukraine are preparing to do in the Strait of Hormuz is something far more strategically calculated than it appears. And even Washington, with all its carrier groups and satellite intelligence and naval doctrine, didn't see this particular move coming. To understand why, you need to start where this story really begins. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched military operations against Iran. The immediate consequence within hours was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran mined it, systematically, aggressively, and in the early chaos of the war, according to a New York Times report citing U.S. officials, the URG laid those mines so quickly and in such volume that Iran's own forces lost track of exactly where all of them were. Think about what that means for a moment. The world's most strategically vital waterway, 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, carrying 20% of all globally traded oil, 20% of liquefied natural gas, and up to 30% of the world's fertilizers, was now a minefield that even its creators couldn't fully map. The International Energy Agency didn't call this one of the worst supply disruptions in history. They called it the largest ever, not the 1970s oil shock, not the Gulf War, the largest in recorded history. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel. American gas prices crossed $4 a gallon. European LNG prices nearly doubled. Airlines added fuel surcharges. Countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Vietnam declared fuel emergencies. Gulf states that depend on the strait for over 80% of their food imports started airlifting basic staples because supermarket shelves were emptying. And through all of this, one question sat at the center of every strategic conversation in Washington, London, Paris, and Brussels. Who is going to fix this? The answer that emerged, and this is the part that genuinely surprised Western defense planners, was not the United States alone. It wasn't the Royal Navy alone. It wasn't the combined force of NATO's Atlantic powers. It was Ukraine. A country still fighting for its own survival on its eastern front. A country that 4 years ago most of the world expected to fall within days. That country is now preparing to send its naval vessels into the Persian Gulf to clear mines from the world's most critical energy choke point, and the United Kingdom is standing right behind it, making sure it actually happens. But this is where the story gets more complicated, because Ukraine isn't doing this out of pure altruism, and Britain isn't facilitating it out of simple alliance loyalty. What's happening here is a level of strategic thinking that connects the war in Eastern Europe directly to the price of oil in the Gulf and directly to the amount of money flowing into Russia's defense budget every single day. Here is the number you need to hold in your mind for the rest of this story. $150 million. That is how much extra revenue Russia was earning per day every single day from the Hormuz closure alone. The Financial Times calculated it. The Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center confirmed it. The Kyiv Post reported that in the first 2 weeks of the blockade, Moscow received between $1.3 and $1.9 billion in additional export tax revenues. Countries that had been cutting their purchases of Russian crude quietly, carefully, under Western diplomatic pressure, suddenly found themselves scrambling for whatever they could get. Russian oil that had been selling at a discount was suddenly trading at a premium. Chatham House, the London-based Foreign Policy Institute, described it plainly. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz was, in their words, an economic gift for Putin, and that's the part most people are missing. Before February 2026, Ukraine had been slowly, methodically winning an economic battle against Russia. Drone strikes on Baltic port infrastructure, precision attacks on energy export facilities, pressure that had helped bring Russia's oil revenues to their lowest point since the full-scale invasion began. According to IEA data, export volumes had dropped to 6.6 million barrels per day. GDP was contracting. Russian bankruptcies were up 31% in 2025. Analysts at Chatham House believed Putin was approaching a moment where the economy might force him into real concessions. And then Hormuz closed, and $150 million a day started flowing back into Moscow's war chest. Every week the strait stays closed, Russia earns over $1 billion in additional capacity to fund the war in Ukraine. Every mine sitting in that waterway is indirectly a subsidy to the Russian military. That is not metaphor. It is a direct financial pipeline from Iranian mine-laying strategy to Russian artillery shells landing on Ukrainian cities. Ukraine understands this completely, which is why sending mine hunters to Hormuz is not a detour from Ukraine's war strategy. It is a continuation of it on a global stage, using tools and partnerships that Vladimir Putin never anticipated when he ordered what he called a special military operation in February 2022. The 4 vessels now docked in Portsmouth represent one of the most capable mine countermeasures packages that any country outside a major naval power could field right now. 2 Sandown-class ships, formerly HMS Grimsby and HMS Shoreham of the Royal Navy, now commissioned as the Cherna and the Chessie purpose-built mine hunters. With variable depth sonar specifically designed for the kind of acoustically complex, thermocline heavy warm shallow waters you find in the Persian Gulf. These are not patrol boats. They are precision instruments for finding things designed not to be found. One of them, the Cherna, formerly HMS Shoreham, spent 3 years deployed in the Middle East starting in 2018. It has operated in those waters. It knows those conditions. That is not a small detail. The other 2 ships, the Mariupol and the Matapol, are tripartite-class mine hunters donated to Ukraine by Belgium and the Netherlands, vessels with a genuinely fascinating Cold War history, born from a 1973 agreement between 3 nations who each contributed a different component of the design, around 40 hulls across. 3 fleets, one of the few genuine examples of multinational shared naval construction from that era. All 4 crews have completed their NATO interoperability assessments. The Ukrainian Navy has confirmed they are trained and ready, and according to reports, the Netherlands is expected to deliver a 5th vessel, to be commissioned as the Henichesk in June 2026. Ukraine's mine countermeasures fleet is not shrinking, it is growing. Now, there is a practical problem sitting between these ships and the strait. On April 23, Axios confirmed, citing a U.S. official and a separate source with direct knowledge, that the URG had begun laying fresh mines in Hormuz, new mines active laying operations during a ceasefire that was technically still in place. The same day, President Trump posted on Truth Social ordering the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any Iranian vessel caught laying mines with, in his words, no hesitation. He confirmed that 2 U.S. mine countermeasures vessels, the USS Chief and the USS Pioneer, were already operating in the strait alongside underwater drones and specialist helicopters, and he tripled the rate of U.S. mine sweeping operations. The Pentagon acknowledged that fully clearing the strait could take up to 6 months. 6 months, with 3 aircraft carriers simultaneously positioned in the region for the first time since 2003. With Israel's defense minister publicly stating his country was prepared to renew the war and waiting only for Washington's green light, with peace talks having collapsed. Islamabad round 1 lasting just 21 hours with no agreement, round 2 cancelled entirely when Trump cited infighting in Tehran. This is not a ceasefire. It is a pause between 2 armies still pointing weapons at each other, and the UK and France have been explicit. Neither country will send ships into the strait while meaningful probability of war resumption remains. Ukraine's vessels stay in Portsmouth until a real sustainable ceasefire exists. But the moment it does, the sequence moves fast. The mission was planned at the April 22nd Northwood Summit, with 30 nations contributing to the framework. Italy has confirmed it is assembling a 4-vessel package of its own. Over 36 countries have signed a joint statement condemning Iranian attacks on commercial shipping and expressing readiness to contribute. France and the UK jointly declared on April 17 that they would establish an international defensive mission for the Strait once conditions allowed. And at the center of all of it, the nation that declared readiness first, the nation whose commitment provided the framework around which every other contribution was built, was Ukraine. Analysts at Defense One noted specifically that the detachable sonar systems on Ukraine's Sandown-class vessels are configured for the exact acoustic conditions of the Gulf's warm, shallow, thermocline heavy waters, precisely where Iran's Mahom 3 mines, with their combined acoustic and magnetic sensors and 300 kilogram warheads, are designed to hide. Intelligence on mine locations has been built up by U.S. underwater drones and satellite surveillance for weeks. These ships are not going to improvise when they arrive. They are going to execute a mission that has already been planned in granular detail. And when they do, when shipping resumes and supply increases and oil prices begin to fall, Russia's $150 million daily windfall starts evaporating. Chatham House's analysis suggests sustained price decline could push oil toward $50 a barrel over the longer term, at precisely the moment Russia faces production constraints, sanctions pressure, and export limitations. That scenario, in Chatham House's own language, could be devastating for Russia's budget in the medium term. Ukraine reopening Hormuz doesn't just inconvenience Putin, it strikes at the financial foundation of his ability to keep fighting. But there is one more dimension to this story, one that will matter long after the mines are cleared and the ships come home. Ukraine cannot send conventional naval vessels into the Black Sea. The Montreux Convention ensures that. Russia decimated Ukraine's traditional fleet in the early stages of the war. Ukraine rebuilt through ingenuity. Unmanned vessels, sea drones, asymmetric tactics that forced Russia's Black Sea fleet to retreat from Crimea without Ukraine never needing to match Russia ship for ship. But Montreux still capped Ukraine's traditional naval projection. Hormuz changes that calculation entirely by sending mine hunters to the Persian Gulf, coordinating with the Royal Navy, operating alongside French and Italian vessels, signing 10-year defense partnerships with Gulf Arab states that Zelensky himself confirmed include Ukrainian sea drones. Ukraine is projecting conventional naval capability into a global theater without needing the Black Sea at all. Putin invaded expecting to neutralize a regional power in days. Instead, he created something he never anticipated, a combat-hardened, globally connected force that can now operate in the Persian Gulf, that Gulf Arab states actively want as a partner, that NATO nations are training and equipping not just to survive but to project. None of that was in his calculation in February 2022. When those 4 ships finally leave Portsmouth through the English Channel, south past Gibraltar, through the Suez Canal, into the Red Sea, into the Gulf of Oman, they will be carrying something more important than sonar equipment and mine disposal vehicles. They will be carrying proof that a country that was supposed to have been broken, absorbed, and forgotten 4 years ago is now operating on the world stage in ways that even its closest allies didn't fully anticipate. That is why Washington was surprised, not because the operation is technically impossible, but because the strategic imagination required to connect the war in Ukraine to the Strait of Hormuz, to Putin's oil revenues, to a naval deployment from a British port, that kind of thinking wasn't supposed to come from Kyiv, not from a country still fighting trench warfare on its eastern front. And yet here we are, the ships are ready, the crews are trained, the plan exists, the coalition is forming around Ukraine's commitment. The only question left is whether the ceasefire holds long enough to let them sail. And if it does, the next chapter of this war will be fought not in the mud of eastern Ukraine, but in the waters. of the Persian Gulf quietly, strategically, with 4 ships that most of the world has never heard of. That's the story underneath the story, and now you know it.